Hi everyone, my name is Brittany Lamb, and I first off want to thank everyone at Poudre School District and those involved in the Mental Health Matters event for having me here and for asking me to be here and share my story. So I'm going to tell you my story and then tell you how it's affected me and where I'm at today and how I've gotten to where I am. I was the victim of a drinking and driving crash that happened in 1997, so I'll save you the math. I was 12 years old then and 36 now. So I'm just going to tell you my story and then kind of go from there. On December 14th, 1997, my aunt had come over to my house and she surprised me with tickets to go see the Nutcracker. So I was in a production of the Nutcracker at my dance studio, and I had never seen a live performance, so I was very excited when I got that surprise. It was a Sunday evening, so it was a school night, but I was allowed to go out. My aunt loved to take me and my siblings out, and she didn't have any kids of her own, so we were kind of her kids, and we went out to the Nutcracker, and it was just such a great time. It was in Denver, and you know, the costumes and the lightings and the music were just magical. I had a very, very fun time with my aunt. After the show, we went outside to the lobby and my aunt said, hey, you know, pick out whatever you want. And so it took me such a long time to figure out what I wanted at the souvenir table. I mean, there were trinkets and ornaments and nutcrackers and just t-shirts and everything. So I actually ended up getting an ornament of ballet slippers and a t-shirt. And then we made our way out through the Buell Theater and into the parking garage. I remember sitting in the passenger seat in the front and looking at the wall in front of me that was concrete, but it was it just had graffiti on it. I was trying to figure out what it said. My aunt started backing out of the parking spot, and you know, I looked over and she didn't have her seatbelt on, and I was like, hey, you know, you got to put your seatbelt on. And she's like, oh, it's broken. I'm like, okay, cool. So we started driving down on the way back home, and we were listening to Spice Girls because that was the band at the time, the girl band, and we both loved it, so we were singing along. And one thing I really remember is we were driving down Broadway, and there were not a lot of cars around, but we were hitting every single red light. Every single green light on the way down. And I was like, oh, we are super lucky because look at that. It just keeps going green, green, green all the way down. Well, our luck was going to change because we turned onto Santa Fe, and we're probably about a mile from my parents' house. So Santa Fe is just a busy road in Littleton. It was actually under construction at the time, so there were some cones dividing the two sides of the street, right? So instead of concrete barriers or anything, it was just some cones. And around the same time that we had turned on there, a man was leaving the bar with two of his friends. And so he had two of his friends in his car. He was driving a little black Mazda, and it just so happened that at the same time that he crossed the median, my aunt's car was right there, and he ended up hitting us head on. So I'll go into how I remembered this eventually, but I didn't remember anything right away. But what did happen was the man who hit us, he did cross the median, hit us head on. Our car spun a couple times, and I just remember glass just showering around me and spinning and confusion and noise, a lot of noise. And when we came to a stop, I just remember kind of looking out at the sky, like I could see it. There was no windshield in the way, it was just the sky. And I look over and my aunt, her head is on the steering wheel and there's blood, and I just started screaming for her to wake up. I'm not really sure how much time passed, but I all of a sudden heard noise above me and realized that there was a firefighter looking up at me, or looking down at me, through the car. And so, I started paying attention to him, and I didn't know what was going on my aunt's side of the car anymore. And I would later learn that his name is Fred. So Fred said, "Hey, I'm going to get you out of here. You just need to trust me. You need to be calm." I was like, "Okay." And so I heard some noise, and then he came back and he put a blanket over me. He said, "I'm going to put this blanket over you, and we're going to get you out of here." I was like, "Okay." And I remember the blanket being very thick and itchy, kind of like a wool. I think it was wool or something. It smelled like sawdust a little bit. But he put it over me, and then I heard a lot of loud noises. And then the next thing I know, I was in the night air, in the fresh air, and I was being wheeled on a stretcher into an ambulance. Once I got in the ambulance, I started getting angry at the paramedics because they were cutting off my shirt. And it was my favorite sweater that I was wearing, and so I was just upset at them. And I asked Fred, who was still there, to go get the stuff that my aunt had bought me. And for some reason I wasn't wearing shoes, and I said, "Please go get my shoes. They're my favorite." So, and then the next thing I remember is I was being wheeled into the emergency room, and the lights were just bright fluorescent lights, and there were nurses around me, people in scrubs and white coats. And I remember one nurse in particular, and I don't know his name, but I know that he had curly brown hair and he had the kindest brown eyes. And he asked me what my name was, and I knew my name, I did, but I was so confused. I was so cold. I didn't know. I didn't want to say anything. So that's actually the last thing that I remember before waking up in the ICU. So I woke up once in the ICU, and I just remember a nurse being in there, a woman, and she said that I just got out of surgery and I was going to go into another one. So I just kind of heard the machines around me beeping, and then I don't remember anything else. So the next thing I remember was waking up, and I was in a regular hospital room, and my older brother was sitting on the edge of the bed, and he was watching the Broncos game. And I just know that they were winning. It was 24-14 or 24. It was 24-7, I think. Anyhow, they were winning, and he turned around and he just smiled at me, and that was like, okay, I don't know what's happening. I don't know anything, but I'm gonna be okay. So I was in the hospital for 10 days, which is kind of a miracle because of all the injuries I sustained. So my head had hit the dashboard, and my forehead had been completely exposed, the bone and everything. I was actually put in an induced coma because I had a lot of swelling and pressure in my head. I had to have extensive reconstructive surgery on my face because my nose and my cheekbones had been crushed. And so I actually currently have plates in my cheekbones and on top of my mouth because of the reconstructive surgery. I had broke my collarbone. I broke some fingers, some toes, my foot, and I had major head trauma. So, I like to say that I'm lucky. I know I'm not lucky because of this situation, but I know that it could have been a lot worse. And I was alive. I remember when my parents told me that my aunt had passed away, I didn't believe them, and I didn't want to believe them. I was still processing kind of what happened with me, and I couldn't process anything else. So, slowly throughout the years, I would find out what happened. I personally didn't want to talk about it. I thought that the more that I ignored it, the more that I refused to talk about it, that it would just go away, right? I was taken to therapy, and I refused to talk to this therapist. And, I think we tried 2 different therapists, but I went twice. I refused to speak about it. So in addition to my aunt passing away in the crash, while they were trying to get me out of the car, the firefighters wanted to put me, and the EMTs wanted to put me onto the Flight for Life because my injuries were very severe. I was young, and they wanted to get me to the hospital. But my door wouldn't open. So the decision was made to put the man who had caused the crash onto the Flight for Life. And so that happened, and then there were 2 nurses and a pilot in the helicopter as well. And the pilot was a very skilled pilot. I learned just recently that he was a military pilot, and kind of used to taking off in a different way. And so there was a lot of construction going on, as I mentioned earlier, at the site of the crash. And when the pilot took off, something happened, and he didn't see the power lines above him, and the helicopter actually went up and got caught in the power lines, and just crashed, and everybody died. So I could have been on there, and I thank my stars, and I thank my Aunt Julie, because I really feel that she was there, and that she was just there for me and holding my door shut, not wanting me to be on that helicopter because I'm supposed to be here. So back to therapy. I tried, and I refused to talk. And so a couple months later, well, it was February, so the crash happened in December, and in February I was going back to school. So I was in 6th grade, and 6th grade is a hard time. It's very, very hard. And kids are trying to figure out who they are and what they stand for, and who are my new friends, and who are all these people, and it's really hard. And so I was already a semester in, but I did go back a little late, and I was, I had scars on my face. I was in a cast. I was going through physical therapy, and I was recovering from the head trauma. For the second half of 6th grade, like after the crash happened, I felt very supported. I mean, people were helping me, and they were carrying my books, and kind of wanted to hang out with me. And then I was in 7th grade. I was just the girl who got in the crash. I felt very isolated. I felt that I lost a lot of friends. I was depressed without knowing it at the time, but I was. And again, I started to just retreat into myself and not talk about anything. And I clearly remember the first time that I was called Scarface. And that's kind of when the bullying started. So I was walking down the hall, and it was a cloudy day. I just remember it being cloudy because there were windows up top above the lockers. And I was walking down the hallway, and this boy came walking the other way, and I knew who he was, and I never thought anything of him. I didn't know he would ever call me something like this, but he just walked by and said, "Hey, Scarface," and I was very taken aback. I went into the bathroom, and I cried, and I was like, okay, just get yourself together. But that wasn't the only time that happened. That seemed to stick. And so I kind of went through 7th and 8th grade with a very small group of friends, 2 of them. and, you know, really just kind of stuck to the people that I knew. And I'm like, I'm just going to deal with this. You know, I kept thinking, okay, this crash was my fault. I deserve to be called Scarface. That was what was going through my head at the time. I got to high school and things, you know, I thought, okay, things are going to be different, you know, new group of people. And the first day of class, I sat down in a seat and I'm like, I'm going to say hi to this girl behind me. And I turned around and I looked at her, I smiled, and I'm like, I can't do this. And I turned back around and I just, like, all right. Then I was mad at myself, you know, I can't, it's like, oh, maybe I really am the same person. You know, I think in high school, things got a little bit better with bullying because it's even a more bigger world than middle school, and people are really trying to figure out who they are and where they belong. And, you know, I did track and I did cross country, and I made some good friends there. And then I joined the dance team, which was a very close, tight-knit group, and we just really got, I kind of found my groove in high school. You know, things weren't great. I was still suffering from depression without knowing it. I was still very quiet, you know, the kind of quiet that, like, painfully shy. You walk by somebody and I put my head down because I don't want to look at them in the eye. You know, I would know the answer in class, but I didn't want to raise my hand because I was just so afraid of what other people were going to think of me. So that was kind of my my high school experience. I ended up going to college. I went to CSU, and I didn't really think about it. I just went because that's what everybody else is doing, right? And I thought, okay, I'm going to fit in. I'm going to be normal. I'm going to go to college just like everybody else. And I did have a great time. You know, my freshman year, I had a really good group of people in my dorm, and we really got along. Now, I never mentioned my car crash. I never mentioned that I thought, oh, I could be depressed. You know, nothing of that ever happened. But I did party quite a bit, and it's nothing that I'm proud of, but I did. That's what happened. And my sophomore year, I ended up getting pregnant. And to this day, I still don't know who the dad is. And that was just a very, very hard time for me. I tried to hide the pregnancy. I would wear baggy sweaters. I worked out 2, 3, 4 times a day. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do. You know, I got very, very sick one time, and I ended up going to the on-campus health clinic. And the doctor knew right away. You know, she was like, I need you to take a pregnancy test. And I did. And so she was talking to me, and she's like, okay, who are you going to call? You need to call somebody. And she made me call somebody before I left the office, and I wasn't very happy with her because I was trying to hide this. I didn't know what to do. I was lost. I was confused. And so I called my older brother, and he was in the Navy, and I knew that he was out to sea at that time, so he wouldn't answer. So I left a message, and I still don't know if he ever got that message. But I ended up, you know, I left the clinic, and she had given me the name of a therapist, and I was just like, whatever. Well, I ended up getting very, very sick after that, like a lot sicker than I was, and you know, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna call my dad. And so I did. I called my dad. I said, hey, I'm really sick. He came right up and brought me to the doctor down in Littleton, and they ended up admitting me to the hospital because I had a kidney infection that was really bad. And I remember waiting to go to the hospital, and I was sitting in the doctor's room. Well, I think I was laying down in a bed. And, you know, the nurse had asked me prior, do your parents know? I was like, no, they don't. They don't know. And so I had to tell them. And my parents are the most kind, amazing people in this world. And I was scared to tell them because I was so ashamed. And so, you know, I was laying there and my parents were on both sides of the bed, and I just look at the nurse and I like nod my head, and she's like, okay. So she kind of knew, okay, I'm going to tell them. And so she told them that I was pregnant, and, you know, I think they cried a little bit, but they were so supportive and just so willing to help. Even though, just like the car crash, I didn't want to talk about it. I refused to talk about it, right? So that was something that was very hard for me. And so I ended up, you know, I got to the hospital. I was fine. I got released. I got back to school. Still hiding my pregnancy. 2 of my friends knew, and they confronted me about it, and I tried to deny it. But eventually I told them, and then my roommates knew. And so, you know, people knew, but they knew that I didn't want to tell anybody. They knew I didn't want to talk about it. And unfortunately, because I didn't want to talk about it, I lost so many friends because I was isolating myself. Just completely isolating myself. I ended up calling an adoption agency, and I gave the baby up for adoption, and that was a very proud moment for me because, you know, I knew I couldn't raise the child, and so picking out parents for this child was probably, it was hard. I mean, one of the hardest things I've done, you know, giving a life to this child, knowing that I couldn't raise it, and just picking out the best parents. And, you know, it was an open adoption, so he knows me and I know him, and it was really good. But so I picked them out, and then a couple months later I had the baby. And so it was freeing for me. It was like, oh, I can get my life back. But in truth, I didn't get my life back because I was still a mental mess. I mean, I don't know if that's right to say, but I was just a mess, you know. I was dealing with a lot of stuff, a lot of bottled up emotions, and I ended up seeing, I realized that I was depressed, or that something was off, you know. And so I ended up seeing an on-campus therapist, and we talked, and I don't think I went very deep. We had 2 sessions, and I just kind of just started talking, and, you know, just about life and what happened, and a little bit about the baby, but again, nothing about the car crash. And that was really my first experience with therapy. So fast forward a little bit, and I got married young, and you know, it was a very tumultuous relationship. It was focused a lot around drinking. I had a baby, and he is the most amazing boy. He's 11 now, but he changed my life because, you know, I started realizing that I'm responsible for this child, and I need to be responsible for myself. I need to, you know, really not only be responsible for my physical self, but my mental self as well. And it wasn't until a few years later that I met a woman who would become my therapist, and, you know, she was starting this program, and it was called IOME. So it was an IOME, you know, take care of yourself first. And I was part of the pilot program of that. And at the time I was going through divorce, and our first therapy session, I don't know what made me do it, but I just talked, you know, about everything. And I mentioned the baby, and I mentioned the car crash, and I don't know if I had mentioned the bullying at that time, but you know, she was like, okay, let's take care of this, you know, let's start working it out. And so I did traditional therapy for a while, but her name is Becky. She said, you know, Becky said, let's try EMDR therapy. Have you ever heard of it? And I was like, no. So I did some research, and EMDR is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So the way that I think about it is it takes all those memories that are in your head and just kind of rewires your brain so that you can remember them, so that you can process them, you know. And once we started doing that therapy, I was amazed. Let me go back a second. So I had 2 buzzers in my hands, and they kind of buzzed in a pattern, and Becky would ask me to breathe, and then, before that, we would kind of think about a thing that we wanted to process, and then, after the buzzing and the breathing, and, Becky would say, okay, now just tell me what's coming to mind, and I just started talking and kind of figuring out things and seeing things like about the crash that I had never seen before, like the hit, the impact. I had never processed that. I had never even thought about that before. And Fred, the firefighter, and just seeing his face and seeing my aunt's head on the steering wheel and just starting to really process all that. And I'm like, dang, like, I've been through a lot. I have been through a lot. And through that process, even though it was 20 years later, I was 32 about, I had still all these years thought that the crash was my fault. Being a smart adult, I still thought that the crash was my fault. And sometimes, when you tell yourself something over and over and over and over and over again, like that becomes your truth. And so that was my truth. And I really started to realize that through therapy, and like, no, that's not my truth. That's a lie I've been telling myself. And so I started to be able to just feel better about the crush, and then, just knowing that that wasn't my fault lifted such a huge burden off my shoulder. And it was also around this time that after I was doing EMDR, that I decided to I wanted to just volunteer for MAD, which is Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And so I reached out to them, and the lady that I spoke with, she said, hey, have you ever thought about speaking? And I was like, no, no. Like I get up in front of a class and I black out because I can't remember anything that I needed to say. She's like, no pressure, just think about it. And I thought about it, and I kind of talked it over with Becky, and it's like, okay, maybe I can do that. So I started speaking at victim impact panels, and it was probably one of the most therapeutic things I could have done besides EMDR. I was speaking to a room of individuals who have been convicted of a DUI or DWAI, and just telling my story. And at this point, I was really only talking about the crash, and that's what I focus on at those panels. But it was just like time to let go, and it just helped me. And I started to realize, maybe if I don't bottle these things up, and if I don't keep everything in my heart, and I just let people know what's on my mind, like, hey, that's helpful. It's really helpful. So after that's when I kind of started speaking. I'm like, okay, I want to help more people, so I like to talk about my bullying, about how I was bullied, because I feel that it's very, I feel like I was lucky in a sense, because there wasn't social media around. There wasn't, we used computers to play Oregon Trail, right? So there wasn't a lot of that around. And I really love to tell kids that you don't know, and adults too, you don't know what somebody else is going through. You will never, ever know the extent of what somebody's going through. And a friend of mine I was talking to, and she's like, yeah, it's like an iceberg. I'm like, Oh my gosh, it is. So you can see a surface of an iceberg. You know kind of what it looks like. You can assume that it has stuff below the surface, but you don't know what it looks like down there. And that's exactly how human beings are. And you can see them on the surface. You know that we all have blood and bones inside, but we don't know other people's inner thoughts, inner feelings, what they are just, what they crave, what they're scared of, what they're going through. And I think it's so important to realize that everybody has stuff. Everybody has something that they're going through, that they're struggling with, whether it's an addiction, whether it is fear at home, whether it is depression, anxiety, whether they think a car crash that killed 5 people was their fault. And so to speak unkindly to someone and to bully them or harass them, there's just no place for it, because you might be going through something that nobody knows about. And your home life might be something that nobody knows about. And you wouldn't want people to make fun of you for that, right? Or to make fun of you for something when you can't control it. And so that's why it's so, so important to realize that people are icebergs and there's so much below the surface, There's cracks, there's crevices, there's deep places that'll never see the light of day. And so I really just think that by telling my story and just trying to get it out there, that people can realize that it's okay, it's all right to be vulnerable. But it's also very, very important to ask for help. I mean, if you have been through something and you don't know how to feel about it, or you think that it's weird, or you're scared to talk to somebody, like that fear is completely normal, right? I was scared out of my mind to go to therapy. I'm like, I'm gonna tell this woman everything about me? No. But once I really started to just talk, I'm like, oh my gosh, weights after weights have just been lifted from my shoulders, and I've come out stronger. I wrote a book. It is Stuck at 12, and I'm really, really proud of it. There's just a lot of details in there, stuff about self-care, stuff about bullying, about getting help. And I think that's kind of what I want to end on. Let me just make sure that I talked about everything that I wanted to. Really, my whole thing right now is about coming out stronger, right? So I've been through something. It took me 20 years to really be able to even utter words about it without being able to cry. And now I'm stronger. But really, I'm stronger because I have learned the value of self-care. And that's a huge thanks to Becky, because that's what she taught me. You can't take care of somebody else if you're not taking care of yourself. And so my son needs my full attention. He needs stuff from me. But I can't give him that, and I can't give him the love, and I can't play taxi, drive him everywhere, and not be completely stressed out of my mind if I'm not taking care of myself. So I make it a priority. I go for a run, or I work out, or I read a book. I write. I love to blog. I love to, new thing is doing puzzles, but I find stuff for myself. I go out with my friends. I keep a very close group of friends, but it's great. It's good to just have that time to yourself. And that's so important for your mental health too. And I'm not just talking to to adults. I'm talking to kids too. Like, you have to take care of yourself. You have to have time for yourself. You know, you can't just be go, go, go all the time, because you will burn out and you will get tired and things will start to slip, you know. And so I just really encourage you all to take a couple minutes out of your day to be like, okay, you know, center yourself, meditate, pray, whatever you feel that you need to do to just fill that cup back up. At the end of every chapter in my book, I do have questions, because I think it's really important for you to think about some of the things that I've talked about. How do you define trauma is one thing, because trauma is different to so many people, right? Trauma can be a car crash. Trauma can be somebody emotionally abusing you. Trauma can be you witnessing a car crash or something. Even watching something on the news and being traumatized, that's trauma, and everybody defines it differently. So that's also very important to realize, that how something affects one person one way, another person, it's going to affect completely different. And then I also, you know, I want you to reflect on how you treat people. You know, do you treat people with respect? Are you respecting everybody? Or do you have some improvement to make in that area? You know, whether it's online, whether it's in person, whether it's talking to somebody on the phone. I mean, there needs to be a deep level of respect for everybody, because everybody has blood, right? Everybody's going through stuff. So, and then I think that might be it. Sorry, I'm just looking at some of these questions. I guess the last thing I'll say is take care of yourself today. Whether it is going for a walk, walking your dog, petting your cat, just doing something for you, because you are worth it. You are worth so much. And you need to take care of yourself, because nobody else will, right? So I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much for listening. And I just appreciate you all. So